Brilliant. I think
Hi.
it's all popped up. We are now live on lovely YouTube. And good morning, everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Planning Policy Executive Advisory Panel, held this morning, Monday, the 21st of February, on, I nearly said Teams, but it's Zoom, isn't it? And welcome to everybody. And if there is any members of the public tuning in on YouTube, welcome to you as well. So we've got quite an interesting meeting today. Rather looking forward to the discussion, but in the meantime, we'll just run through the agenda. Are there any apologies for non-attendance?
No, Chairman, all members are present.
Thank you. Are there any members' declarations of interest? Okay, I hear no.
Sorry, Councillor, can I just say that I am a property investor. So if we're discussing Article 4, can I declare some form? I don't have any, but let me declare some interest in that, please.
Okay, it would probably be just a general interest rather than a DPI or anything like that. So yeah. Okay, thank you. Are there any other declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Let's now look at the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January. You should have all had a chance to review them. And are there any comments as to their accuracy? Okay, and therefore I hope I can sign these as a true record of the meeting, or I can virtually sign them as a true record. Thank you. And I shall do so. Brilliant. And so we'll now move to agenda item 4, which is the report on houses in multiple occupation. And before we get going, I would like to thank the team that have done what is such a very good paper, and there's been a lot of evidence gathering about that, and it's very interesting to see the spread of houses in multiple occupation, and you know the reasons obviously for it are not unconnected with some of the employment opportunities that exist in that area. It is also very interesting to see some of the percentages. While we have a lot of HMOs in Northamptonshire, it's considerably lower as a percentage of total households than it appears in Northampton. But as I say, some very good work's been done. It's a very clear, very good report. And I would invite Bernice to take it. But of course, just before she does, this is a multi-agency report, and obviously we also need to extend thanks to colleagues from all other areas of the council's operations. You know, as it says at 4.3, from environmental health, private sector, housing, planning, council tax, development management, public health and planning policy. So it's really involved a lot of people working in. And so, Bernice, good morning. I hope I haven't stolen all your thunder. Would you care to take us through the paper?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. That was a very helpful introduction. So you touched on some of the things that I'd like to cover. I'll highlight the key stages of the investigation so far, along with the next steps, which hopefully will prompt some relevant discussion and then some feedback from you all. So the report explains the considerable work that has been undertaken since the panel's discussions last July, where officers were tasked with investigating the possible use of Article 4 directions for HMOs in North Northants. We have since formed an officer working group to lead the investigation, which includes a range of officers from different teams and service areas across the council. This has helped with gathering as much information as possible relating to HMOs, but also to share knowledge from the various interactions the teams have with HMOs in their separate functions. The working group has also helped with identifying the best sources of information and understanding the different processes and systems currently used to record the data in each area. There are currently estimated to be 1,114 HMOs across North Northants, and the information gathered has allowed us to map the location of these, as shown in the map below paragraph 5.2 of the report. This clearly shows there to be a concentration of HMOs in the more central urban areas of the main towns. Further ward level analysis is set out in the table below paragraph 5.3 and the following section of the report. This shows that the highest number of HMOs in North Northants are located within Kingswood Ward in Corby, which has 202 HMOs, which is also 18% of the total HMOs in North Northants, followed by Findham Ward in Wellingborough with 130 HMOs, or 12% of the total HMOs in North Northants, followed by Northall Ward in Kettering with 128 HMOs, which is 11% of the total HMOs, which is followed by Cloverhill Ward in Kettering with 113 HMOs. The fourth column in the table shows the proportion of HMOs as a percentage of the total households for each ward, which for these 4 wards ranges from 2.46% in Kingswood Ward to 1.32% in Northall Ward, Kettering. And as you picked up, Chair, comparable information for Northampton shows significantly higher ranges between 8 and 14%. The evidence gathered relating to complaints shows that there are higher levels of complaints in the urban areas, but there are significant gaps in the information due to different IT systems and knowledge within the area teams. The next stage of the investigation will be to develop detailed local area profiles for the wards with the highest number and concentrations of HMOs, including the 6 wards listed at paragraph 5.9 of the report. This will be led by the Officer Working Group. This report has been brought to members to update you of progress made with the investigation so far, but also to gain feedback from you in advance of developing the local area profiles, to allow an opportunity to discuss any issues or information you are aware of that may help to strengthen the Council's evidence and ensure that a robust and credible investigation is undertaken. As such, there are 3 parts to the recommendation. Firstly, that members of the panel note the progress made with the investigation and the evidence gathered to date. Secondly, to consider and discuss any known issues relating to HMOs and available evidence that could help inform the ward level local area profiles. And finally, to endorse the approach for the investigation, considering a wider range of measures than only Article 4 directions. So any comments or questions are welcomed. Thank you.
Well, Bernice, thank you very much for that very clear run through of the paper. And it is certainly very interesting as a specific subject, which of course will also be going into our other paper coming forward a little later. Thank you. It will go, it will very much be part of the scoping for the overall North Northamptonshire strategic plan. So I'm very much looking forward to a good discussion on it. And I see a forest of hands have already gone up. So let's see what Councillor North has to say.
Good morning, Chairman. I certainly, firstly, I want to echo your comments at the beginning of the meeting. Very much share those. It's very interesting in relation to the data. Thank you for that. And there are some surprises in there, and I appreciate the comments also that you haven't picked up, or because of different IT systems and so forth. Because I'm certainly aware of some of the issues, Chair, that there's been in Rushden, and certainly in my ward there's a number of issues. But as you've said, not everything is going to be picked up. I'm just wondering, Chair, about. This isn't a criticism, by the way, but I'm just wondering, Chair, about in relation to the areas that we're in relation to the table, and I'm not disagreeing with necessarily with the areas to take further investigation, but I think one of the things I'm slightly concerned about is actually doing it on a ward basis in relation to density, because I think there's only one or two ways you can do this, but I am concerned slightly that it is growing in the urban areas, and obviously not all the wards have got the same density of housing. And I am concerned about areas of Rushden, which of course are not going to be covered in this particular further investigation. And of course, then that obviously leads to issues later on if we can't get any Article 4 directions. So I'm just, as I said, this isn't a criticism, but I just wondered how we can look at things on maybe on a density basis as well, rather than just on a ward basis, because obviously there's different densities within the wards. I don't know if that's even possible, but my biggest concern, Chair, and I think that's picked up in relation to the complaints, is certainly issues around the parking and waste and noise. And obviously the higher density areas are going to pick that up. But as I said, that's not a criticism. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor North. And of course, there are clearly issues that, if unmanaged, can affect the areas where there's a lot of houses of multiple occupation, as you rightly point out. And that might not be necessarily in the 6 wards which are particularly high in density of HMOs. It could be anywhere else as well. It all depends slightly upon the context of the individual HMO. We are obviously looking at extending the what's the regulation number? It's gone out of my head. Is it Reg 8? Reg. What's the regulation that would? Oh, Article 4. Thank you. But that is fine. But of course, to extend the scope of Article 4 direction requires an individual evidence base, does it not? But I do think your comment about density and other wards that are not necessarily highlighted is quite cogent. Councillor Barbara Jenny, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is a question, point of clarity, if you could, please. When we talk about HMOs, we automatically think of a single house property with several people sharing, but blocks of flats are also recognised under the term HMO. Can you just tell me if this table includes blocks of flats, or is it purely what we recognise as an HMO, a single house with several occupants, unrelated occupants?
That's a good point. Bernice?
Yeah, to the best of my knowledge, I believe it does include blocks of flats. It would be all HMOs recorded under the definition for the slightly different purposes. We've gathered information from council tax records and environmental health data. So where they have recorded it against the definition as a HMO, we would have captured it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, that's quite an interesting thought, isn't it? Because there are quite a number of houses that you would not consider as HMOs that are split into various units, and I wonder how far they are contributing to the numbers on this table. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, Councillor Anslow, please.
Morning. Thank you.
Morning.
Yes, I didn't realise that. I just assumed that was a legal question or point of clarification. And I think it's one of the reasons why when a small area is looking to be developed into a block of flats, or an old shoe factory, for example, is converted, that there's always points about parking, about refuse, about not noise so much, but it does tend to be parking and refuse, whether they've got places for that to be stored. But of course, that does also apply to single houses. What I'd like to know is the complaints that we've got. It seems like Corby are really good at gathering that information, because most of the Corby wards have got figures next to them. So it'd be interesting to know what their system is and whether that's going to be rolled out across the other 4 areas. But do the complaints come from the residents themselves or from nearby neighbours? That's what I'd like to know, and whether that is something that you can find out. I tend to think, but this might be wrong, that it's going to be neighbours who make the complaints, but it could very easily, now that I know it includes blocks of flats, it could very easily be other residents as well. Yeah. And the second point I want to make is that houses in multiple occupancy are a result of not enough houses, basically. We all know that, don't we? That particularly those sorts of houses that are single units, not flats, single units, where you know, it's shared by, is it over 4? Has to be, I think. Is it 4, the number that makes it a HMO?
Bernice?
If I just briefly, there's ever so slightly different definitions for different purposes. So to class as a HMO that requires mandatory licensing, it would have 5 or more residents.
5 or more.
Yeah.
Okay, 5 or more. Yeah. So in those and the areas that they tend to, as we can see from the map, it's going to be those Victorian built, Edwardian built houses, very close together. Already those streets where those HMOs are placed have already got parking issues, you know, one house perhaps having 2 cars, etc. So I'm not really surprised at the outcome, but it is fascinating. It is fascinating. I'll come back in a moment with another question, but I just wanted to ask that one about whether the complaints come from residents or neighbours.
It's very interesting about your going on to the complaints, and it is, I mean, I'm just looking at this list, and it is indeed fascinating. It seems that with 2 HMOs in the Thrapston ward, we've managed to clock up 88 complaints, and with 202 in Kingswood, they've clocked up a mere 130 complaints, which either means that the Thrapston residents are a rather grumpy lot, or we've got some very interesting HMOs. But no, I mean, your wider point is interesting, and of course, you know, HMOs in many ways are not ideal, but but there will always be some need for them. In employment settings, and also sometimes in educational settings. I mean, if you go to some of our big cities with big university populations, there's a heck of a lot of HMOs for students. So it is interesting to work this out, and certainly the complaints indexing is very illuminating. And I also very much note your point that a lot of these HMOs are in larger Edwardian or Victorian sort of period houses, which were not designed around vehicles. And of course, we live in a fairly rural part of the world, and most people therefore have to use vehicles. So yeah, you make a good point. Bernice, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think probably I should clarify a few things. So the complaints data, that these aren't complaints that are specifically tied to HMO property addresses. These are all complaints that have been recorded in that ward over that time period. So they may not necessarily be anything to do with the HMOs. It's really just to have a broad understanding of the complaints. I think the types of complaints that we chose to show were those that were often considered related to HMOs within all the evidence that we've seen. So obviously people do complain of noise complaints, parking, which is why we picked up on these. And I mean, it's clear to see that we haven't got any data at the moment for the antisocial behaviour and the parking complaints. So that's something that we'd be hoping to supplement further down the line in the local area profiles. So really the numbers aren't necessarily attributed to the number of HMOs. But also the complaints, it's all complaints. So I would imagine most likely not to be made from the person living at that property address. I would imagine more likely to be neighbours, but it's all complaints that have been made during that time period that the council have received. So, and I think also we picked data that was attributed to individual property addresses. So that wouldn't include the accumulated waste would be waste that's attached to an individual property as a complaint. It wouldn't include fly tipping in general because that it's not been attributed to an individual address. So yeah, those probably as points of clarity. So I would imagine from neighbours or nearby residents rather than the people living in the HMO. And your point about the types of houses, I think seeing the concentration in the main urban areas where probably the space standards within the properties are larger would generally lend themselves HMOs as opposed to smaller, newer housing. So yeah, probably the evidence that we found so far isn't surprising, but it's good to see it in evidence form.
Well, thank you for that. And obviously the design of our town centres is interesting because it slightly varies. Obviously the Kettering and Wellingborough and Rushden very much do reflect what Councillor Anslow was saying about the sort of Edwardian, Victorian, larger, houses in the town centres. Of course, Corby is much newer construction, and its housing is completely differently designed.
I think interestingly, it's Kingswood Ward, but that would be the Radburn style housing, which I think is higher density. Yeah.
So anyway, good. Thank you for that. Councillor David Jenny, please.
Well, thank you, Chairman, and for the comments about the Thrapston Ward. Quite interesting, those. I want to examine why these HMOs exist a little bit, please. I understand the higher density of them or the higher number of them in Northampton because of the university. I assume that things like students' halls of residence, nurses' accommodation in Kettering, that sort of thing, I assume those are all included in here. Right, good. And my experience of HMOs is that basically there's sort of a bed sit with a communal kitchen stroke ablution block. Is that the definition that you've been using here?
I believe so. There are more than one. There's a planning definition and a housing definition, but yes, they would be shared kitchen and bathroom facilities. Yeah.
Right. I think it would be helpful if we were, because there are two different definitions. I think it would be very helpful if we were certain as to which definition we were working to. So, understanding that student accommodation does one thing and nursing does another, that obviously, particularly in the Kettering area, that's going to bump the figures up. I'm curious as why the Corby figures are so high. Is it because a labour shortage within Corby and people are being brought in from afar and just living there in the week or that sort of thing to fill out the job vacancies in Corby? Have we got any indication as to that?
We don't have any confirmed data at the moment. I think that's when we look in more detail at the areas with the higher numbers, we'll be able to do a bit more of a ward profile to see if we can get to the bottom of some of that. But I mean, in general terms, I imagine it will be down to house prices and market demand, and perhaps the size of the houses and the labour force, the type of work. I think these are probably some of the conclusions that will be drawn. But until we've got some evidence, I can't really say any further.
But that's one of the whole points of this exercise, is to prepare as detailed an evidence base as we can, which obviously does affect Article 4, any Article 4 extensions that may or may not be brought forward in the future by this council. But it also informs the whole place shaping agenda as we start to work on this strategic plan. So yeah, I think this is extremely interesting. And Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chair. You're actually just touching on what I'm going to raise. From my understanding of this, the government don't like, or the departments don't like Article 4s, and obviously, even when we go further down this route, Chair, I am already making the assumption that we won't be able to do that many. I think certainly part of the concern that we had back end of last year, if you recall, or certainly is coming, is obviously my understanding of Article 4 is actually restricting the permitted development rights, so they have to come to committee to move forward. Now, obviously, we've got 4 area committees at the moment. And I am assuming that there is keen interest. Certainly, I've picked up from members that actually we do have a bit more of a say, if possible, through those area committees of HMOs. So obviously, we look after the well-being of residents a bit better. Now, at the moment, of course, Chair, it'd be interesting to see what other plans, though it mentions in here that there might be other things as well as Article 4, as this is planning policy, Chair, and obviously you just touched on it yourself. We're obviously moving on to the next strategic plan. I'll be interested in what kind of other things, we might not be there yet, but that we can do outside Article 4 if they're not popular with the government, just to enable us to have better control and help with residents so they have better living conditions. I'm obviously making an assumption of what type these HMOs are like, and obviously some are well managed, but there are some that aren't, and obviously that's where we pick up the complaints. And I certainly again know there are issues in Rushden, and obviously with the changes to our town centres, I think one of the biggest concern is obviously permitted development rights, no control over them, converted above shops and not in particularly good condition. And again, that's not necessarily, in my view, the best way to be moving forward. And as again, you touched on yourself, Chair, we got the next item when we're talking about future of town centres. So it would be, I suppose, in a way, very helpful if we can find a way just to have, better control so we can improve these HMOs. I'm not against them, but it'd be good if we can have some kind of standard so we know people are, living in reasonable conditions.
No,
so I'm just going to
excellent.
be moving on anything, Chair, that's to come later in relation to what other things we can do, apart from Article 4, just to improve the lives of people living in HMOs.
Well, absolutely, and it does please me that we are considering not merely using Article 4 as a sort of blunt instrument here. But I wonder, Bernice, I think that's a very well made point. I'd wonder if you would like to make any comment?
I think really just to agree with everything that Councillor North was saying, and I think it'll all be fully considered. But yes, I think the report does highlight that Article 4 directions, it's quite strict, the NPPF in the requirements that you'd have to be showing that the well-being of the area is being affected, which would require quite detailed evidence, but also that really the outcomes of the investigation need to be led by the evidence, which is why we'd like to include any possible appropriate measures as an outcome to the investigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's absolutely right. So I appreciate that, and I just think we are going to have houses in multiple occupation, and there is a demand for it. There will be continuing houses in multiple occupation for a long time, and we're not in a position really to build our way out of the situation in the scale that would probably put an end to it, and it wouldn't be practical anyway in a lot of areas. But we do need to manage the stock that we have, or the stock that obviously is privately owned, but it does need to be properly managed so that the people who are living in those HMOs have a good quality of life, and so does the surrounding area. So really good. Councillor Ranslow, please.
Thank you. Yeah, totally agree. It's about the management of those HMOs. They're not publicly owned. They're not council, not part of our stock. It is private individuals, private companies who buy up the houses to then become HMOs. They are needed, and that's going to be long term. I'd like to think that we'd also have a long-term strategy for more social housing, because families need a bigger space, and if they're in blocks of flats which are included in the HMO definition, there's no outdoor space for children. It's cramped. It's not ideal. And I think there is definitely a need for more social housing that would meet that need, because the price the price of housing is what drives HMOs to exist. For people to invest in in a house and then convert it into an HMO is also a financial thing, isn't it? People will use it perhaps as a pension fund or whatever. But I think the onus should be on the landlords. As landlords ourselves, corporate landlords ourselves,
Mm.
we take responsibility for our housing. We have officers who will pick up on complaints, etc. And there needs to be an onus on private landlords who have HMOs to make them at a certain standard. I quite like the idea. I don't know how it can be done, but I quite like the idea of a, scores on the doors type of thing, where if you go to a restaurant, you know what the quality of the catering is by the score on the door. And I think HMOs need to, people who own them, who want them to be filled with residents who are on the waiting list or on keyways, that they need to reach a particular standard, and that is then followed up when there are complaints. It needs to be managed, basically. It's what Councillor North was talking about. Can I give you an example? There's refuse, and we've been talking about wheelie bins, haven't we, this morning, because of the wind. If you've got no space to put the wheelie bins, because the only space you've got is, the front garden of a Victorian house that's been turned into a HMO, then the residents of that road, who are perhaps private landowners who own their own homes, all they can see are the wheelie bins, which are overflowing with refuse. And I've had to deal with one of these incidents myself in my ward. So if that was managed properly by the landlord, then it would take away some of those complaints and make the area that much better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, you've put your finger on one of the major sources of complaint, which is, of course, refuse. And yes, I know that parking is another major issue, and I know there's no data on it from complaints, but I swear that there will have been some issues regarding parking, I'm sure. But no, you put your finger on it. But also, I think, Councillor North said it first, you said it, that management of HMOs should be much clearer what standards are required. I'm not sure how a scores on the doors would exactly operate because of the variation in HMOs anyway, but I do think that there should be much more emphasis on correct management. Fine, if a private landlord wants to manage an efficient, decent HMO and make some money out of it, man, that's terrific. It serves both purposes, but it should be properly managed. Anyway, Councillor Deering, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm listening to what's being said here, and I think there's some very good stuff coming out on this. And I wonder if I could just make some general comments based on my experience of training people in property around the country. HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy, they're a necessary evil to start with. We have to have them. I think what we're debating here are two things. One is, what can we do with the current stock, and what can we do moving forward? Now, moving forward, if we were to introduce Article 4, we would have, as a directive, an opportunity to control the amount of actual new houses of multiple occupancy that come in within an area. And there are two ways they're done throughout the country. One is not having a HMO licensed within so many square meters of another one, and the other is a percentage of HMOs within an area. So there are ways of dealing with it moving forward. There are also minimum space standards, which I'll come on to two sides here. The minimum space standard with regards to bedroom sizes, with regards to lounges and dining rooms, if you like, so communal areas. There is standards for the amount of cooking facilities, the amount of cupboards, the amount of fridges. It's all there for us to use. What we do, I don't know whether we do have or not, but what we should have is a team of people, of councillors that go around the current ones, which is what we're all complaining about, and have these checked off. And if they're not right, you tell the private landlords what they have to do. And so we are managing it that way. And that's one very good way of doing it. But we have to have our own team that go around these people, identifying the current private houses that are HMOs, of course, is very important. I think that's what we've done here, which is great. And the data is very interesting. With regards to, I just come to a couple of comments made earlier on flats. Flats are not really HMOs. And I understand that if we look back and we look at the big Edwardian houses that, you know, are 5, 6, 7 bedroomed houses. And there's some classic examples that we all know that have been converted into HMOs, and they'll be 7, 8, 9 bed HMOs. However, to turn something like that into a flat usually will mean you can only get 2 or 3 flats in something of that size, because there is a minimum size required now by the government of 37 square meters for a flat. So when you're looking at the large sort of 3-storied old houses, the most you're going to get is 3 flats, and that's not going to be 8 or 9 people. So, you know, I hear what's being said, but I think that in reality we've 2 things here. One is, how do we deal with what we've currently got as stock as HMOs, in particular with the private landlords? And the only way we're going to deal with that is to follow up with inspections and what the space standards and rules and regulations are currently. And if we do decide to move forward with something like the Article 4 directive, it will give us a control over the amount of HMOs that we will accept within an area. So I hope that helps. That's sort of information that I have.
It does, and it certainly highlights the issue. I mean, with flats, of course, it's interesting that they are actually included in the figures here, but of course, flat, you don't have communal areas, you don't have a communal bathroom, you don't have a communal kitchen. It's all relatively self-contained. I mean, there may be a communal area in the building, but the flat is self-contained, and so it meets a completely different definition to the HMO, where basically a lot of accommodation is actually shared. The management, turning to regulation, Article 4, that's interesting, because what I would be interested to know is how any extension of Article 4 could be evidenced, whether it would be practicable to do it, and what would be the pros and cons of so doing. Because I know that there is not a sort of desire on part of government for there to be a massive extension of Article 4 throughout the country. I'm just very interested to know what the pros and cons would be. Bernice, did you want to?
Yeah. I'll briefly touch on the flats first, though. I agree with what you say, Councillor Deering, that in general terms, a block of flats would be a block of flats. But I understand from some of the data we've had from environmental health that an individual flat could be functioning as a HMO as well. So I think where it includes a flat, that could be a small HMO with 3 people living in it. So I don't think it would make up much of the data for our HMOs, but I think it does include some of those, which would be a handful perhaps. On the Article 4 direction, I think there are pros and cons. Probably the list could be endless. The evidence that would be required for the Article 4 we know from guidance that it would need to apply to the smallest geographical area possible, and it would need to be in areas where we've demonstrated that the local amenity and the well-being of the area are being affected. So obviously there's quite an ask from the evidence there. We said about the alternative measures with things like you say about the space standards, Councillor Deering. I think for additional mandatory licensing from environmental health would be required on HMOs with 5 or more residents. And as part of that mandatory licensing, there are requirements for space standards, living conditions, fire safety. So, but then smaller than 5 residents would be classed as a small HMO. That doesn't currently require mandatory licensing, but there are measures that could be used, such as additional licensing on smaller HMOs, which would give the council, more powers to enforce certain standards within those size of HMOs as well. So I think, yes, I see that there's positives and negatives probably from each measure, but this will be our opportunity to review them as how they fit to the individual areas. I think that's how we see it as officers, and we'll have all the relevant expertise within the working groups to help guide us.
Okay, well, thank you for that. That's helpful. Councillor Deering, did you want to come back?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jenny, please. David Jenny.
First of all, in response to Mark's comments, absolutely, totally agree with him. We had an HMO went for planning in Rushden a little while ago on Victoria Road, and they were trying to, I can't remember the exact numbers now, but we did get it reduced in numbers because of the space standards. We had a fight at planning management to do it, but it was achieved. So those comments are there. The planning management officers were well in support on that one. They obviously had a problem with the owner of this place, who wasn't taking advice, and eventually we won through. But it was difficult. It wasn't straightforward. And then turning to this table on 5.3, I think the discussion today has been around very much the sort of the Victorian Edwardian houses that are being converted, and I think thereby that is the problem. I was wondering, because I don't think we should be including flats in these numbers. So my suggestion would be that if you take your total with everything, you should give us a total of flats, of student accommodation, of nursing home accommodation, of nurses accommodation, all these sort of things which are obviously used as HMOs under the definition, and then that will probably give us a little bit more of an understanding as to where the problems might be, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Bernice?
I mean, I think that possibly is something that we could look to do as part of the second stage analysis.
Yeah,
for the local, I think we could probably provide a breakdown of what type of HMOs we've got in there as we develop the local profiles.
Okay, that would be helpful. Brilliant. Okay, I think we've had a pretty good discussion on this. Is there anybody else like to say anything before we move on? Okay, well, thank you very much, Bernice, and that has been a really, really interesting discussion on a really good piece of work. And I know that the second stage review is going to throw up yet more very interesting information. And as I say, it's all good because, as everybody on this panel knows very well, you cannot do anything in planning policy without a robust evidence base. So, the work that's been done by yourself and by all the agencies who've been contributing to it has been really valuable. So thanks very much. And at which point, let's turn to the recommendations at 3.1. It's always 3.1, isn't it? It's recommended that the planning policy EAP notes the progress made with the investigation. Sorry, did somebody say something? No, that's all right. Notes the progress made with the investigation and the evidence gathered to date. Consider and discuss any known issues relating to HMOs and available evidence which could help inform ward level local area profiles. and endorse the approach for investigation, considering a wider range of measures than only Article 4 directions. I don't know that we really need to take a vote. Yes, we probably do. Might I have a proposer for those recommendations en bloc?
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Anslow, and seconder, I saw
Yep.
Councillor Jenny, Councillor David Jenny. All those in favour? Are there any against? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Are there any abstentions? Then that's carried. And thank you very much for a very, very good paper.
Thank you.
Lovely. Now, we only have one other item on the agenda. It's a very simple matter. It is the scoping and issues consultation document for a small document called the Northamptonshire Strategic Plan. Again, very good document. A lot of work's gone into this, and it's absolutely fundamental because we do need to get the building blocks in place at the outset of the journey, which is going to take some time to formulate the new Part 1 local plan. I think everybody on this panel is pretty familiar with the general outline, but getting the questions in the consultation correct and getting the sustainability appraisal and scoping done correctly now will save us all a lot of grief at a later stage. So good morning, Simon James, and would you like to take us through the paper?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks again for the very helpful introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Before I thank you. Well, the purpose of the report is for members to provide feedback on the draft scope and issues consultation document at Appendix A and approach to consultation. So in that context, I will try and be very brief with my overview. The scope and issues consultation is the first stage in preparing the new strategic plan, as Councillor Brackenbury alluded to, and paragraphs 5.1 to 5.5 explain the background to the development of the scope and issues consultation document, and a lot of work has gone into it. At paragraph 5.3, it sets out the various work that has informed the development of the document, and it's worth just picking out that the document has sought to provide greater emphasis on key issues such as the climate emergency, health and well-being, and also tried to take forward the levelling up agenda and respond to the levelling up white paper that was published recently in a local context. And we've talked at previous advisory panels about the Oxford to Cambridge arc, and as para 5.4 recognises, at this stage there's still a certain amount of uncertainty regarding the arc spatial framework, and as the report mentions, we will try and pick up the latest position before we go out for consultation should further clarity become available. 5.5 explains that further amendments to the scope and issues document prior to consultation will be prepared with the agreement of the Executive Member for Growth and Regeneration in consultation with the Executive Director for Place and Economy. So it's worth stressing that there is flexibility to pick up feedback from members today, and also any contextual changes in relation to the ARC, further monitoring data should it be available before we go out for consultation. Officers are also preparing a sustainability appraisal scoping report, which is discussed at paragraphs 5.6 to 5.9 of the report. This document is currently being drafted and finalised, and to meet the statutory regulations, we'll be publishing the SA scoping report for consultation at the same time as scope and issues. Now, this is the first stage in the strategic plan, and at this stage there have been no decisions on the quantum of growth or locations, and it's within that context that the approach to consultation is discussed at paragraphs 5.10 to 5.13 of the report. Obviously, we're required to undertake consultation in accordance with the draft statement of community involvement, which was consulted on between December and January, and we're also considering, and the report discusses, undertaking additional measures from that set out in the in the statement of community involvement. And these are discussed at paragraph 5.11 of the report, and they include a member workshop, drop-in sessions, and preparation of a summary leaflet to assist public and town and parish council engagement in the scope and issues consultation. And we're seeking feedback from members of the panel on the proposed approach to consultation. The next steps are discussed in section 6 of the report, and once the consultation document has been finalised, it's proposed to commence consultation in March for 8 weeks. As Councillor Brackenbury said, this is the first stage. It's putting the building blocks in place. So the responses to the scope and issues consultation document will inform and contribute to the development of the more detailed planning proposals at later stages of the plan making process. And the next stage in the preparation of the strategic plan will be to develop a range of potential spatial options to meet the level of growth being planned for across North Northamptonshire. So we really want the scope and issues consultation document to pick up the key strategic planning issues for North Northamptonshire and ensure that the consultation questions provide officers and members with feedback to shape the strategic plan as it's developed. And we've put a lot of work into trying to pitch the questions, but we're really seeking further feedback through the discussion. And we've also prepared an equalities impact assessment of the scope and issues consultation document, and that's provided at Appendix B of the report. So thank you, Chair. Nothing more from me at this stage, and it's really member feedback, and I'll aim to pick up questions, but also colleagues who've been extensively involved in the drafting of the document can chip in. So thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much, Simon, and thank you and your colleagues for all the hard work that's gone in to getting us to this point of departure. And I think it's probably worthwhile having a quick shout out also to officers and members of the former joint planning unit and joint planning committee who put in an awful lot of work almost to get us to this point of departure back before North Northamptonshire became a thing. There is obviously going to be quite a lot of discussion here, and it is very much to be welcomed that the sort of the consultations with town and parish councils is very much on the agenda as well, because they're going to be focused very much on placemaking in their own areas, and so that's very much to be welcomed. Anyway, I'm going to shut up for a moment and invite Councillor Stephen North to start the debate.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very conscious that we're going to have, as I think as Simon has said, and thank you, Simon, for the report. I should say, support your comments, Chair. There'll be further workshops as we go down through the consultation exercise, and I'm sure, you know, town councils when we get opportunity to comment on each one. Otherwise, I could do that this morning, Chair. But I'm conscious we're here to, you know, seek out the scoping exercise to making sure the questions are right, that we're actually asking the questions in the right kind of area. And I think I only got 2 comments or 2 issues to raise on that particular point for now, until the debate gets going perhaps a bit more. First one is in relation to is question 10. So that's the spatial strategy, distribution and development. I'm just wondering within the questions, and I could take this as a straight no from Simon, Chair, but at some point we did roughly discuss in the joint planning committee, you may recall, of actually thinking about having a new town and a completely new settlement in North Northants, and obviously that would change the tact in relation to the distribution. And I'm just wondering whether that's a strikeout no, because it's not in the current joint core strategy, or we should actually put that in there as part of the consultation questions, or part of the bullet points on page 44. That's my first one. And if I take both of them, Chair, if that's all right with you, because I've only got 2 to raise. The next one I had was town centres, which is page 54, and you know, this may be out there again, but I think maybe one of the phrasing questions again and again, it could be a straightforward no, but are we questioning our town centres and the actual strategies themselves? And the question doesn't actually do that. Now, I appreciate our new corporate plan, but Chair, you and I have been to, and a lot of people on this panel have been to many presentations and consultations from people actually talking about town centres and how they're changing over a period of time. And we spent obviously a lot of time and money, and there's still a lot of time and money with levelling up and the current funding that's coming into our town centres. But of course, you can't force people into them. And people do go elsewhere. Now, we've obviously in that town centre bit, you've got Russian Lakes talked about there. You know, and if I use that as an example, that is heaving constantly. People choose to go there. Some of our other town centres are not so busy, and we can't force people to town centres like many of the conferences we've been in. And I'm just wondering, Chair, where we could rephrase some of the town centre questions about are town centres still relevant to people? Because if people aren't going to use them anymore, or they are going to change fundamentally, if you go around the country, now the department stores are gone, you just see, even in some of the historic towns around the country, you just see how empty some of these town centres are. Now these department stores are gone. I just wondering whether, and the excellent work and questions within this document, Chair, but just wondering if there's a chance or a time to actually ask people whether they think town centres are still relevant. We have said they're still relevant, but I'm not sure we've really asked people whether they're still going to use town centres with the internet, with other choices that's coming forward. So they're my opening 2 points, Chair, or questions, whether they should be included or not.
Well, your second point is a matter of enormous strategic importance throughout the whole country. And you're right. I mean, because of COVID brought it to a head, didn't it? It isn't just COVID, but COVID brought it to a head that all of a sudden there was this period where you were not really encouraged to go out of doors hardly at all. And everybody perforce had to rely on the internet much more than I mean, it was happening anyway, but much more suddenly. And we have, I mean, there's some good stuff on page 55 about it being necessary to think how the council will reimagine and redesign key town centres and how the strategic plan can support regeneration. And they're certainly doing quite a lot of work in Kettering, in Corby, you know, in other town centres to do regeneration work, but the strategic mix, with, you know, the town centres always used to be lots of shops and not a lot else, and some entertainment, you know. But the strategic mix may have to be reimagined. So when you're asking a hugely important question, and this is a question which is occurring to communities up and down the land. The other question is, what are the future of town centres and what are the future of out of centre locations? And we've all seen Rushden Lakes. It's a great success. What do we want to do in other parts of the quite large area that Northamptonshire is? Anyway, Simon, would you like to come back on that before I ramble on too much?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Councillor North for some very thought-provoking questions. So, in respect of the first point about new settlements, bear with me. I'm trying to. I've got the document open on another screen, so I'm just scrolling through it rather than having a physical copy. On page 44. We have flagged new settlements as a potential spatial option, and then the question 10 links into the bullet points of potential spatial options. So we discussed this, and we think that question 10 linked to those bullet points provides sufficient opportunity for people to flag a new town, a new garden village. So we think that hopefully should be covered off, but and sufficiently addresses that issue. In respect of the town centres, we've sought to take forward the corporate plan but recognise there's huge change in the town centres, and we touched on in the previous item the importance of evidence, and we are shortly going to be commissioning some further retail study update, and a key element of that will be household surveys to understand people's new change shopping patterns, and also to provide evidence on town centre strategy. So it's a very interesting point that Councillor North raises about, and I think it's something that we might take away to give a bit more thought to, because obviously at this stage we're seeking to get enough detail but provide some scope within the questions for people to add in. So the retail evidence will provide us with that information on the changing shopping patterns. But I think we'll give some thought to whether we can pick up that issue about use of the town centres a bit more clearly. But the retail study evidence will pick that up and inform the later stages of the plan development.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Councillor Deering, please.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of things actually. I think it's a very good report, thank you. And looking through it now, I do have a slight concern that I see absolutely nothing here to do with gypsy and travellers. Yeah. Now, you know, forgive me if you're doing a separate entity here, but gypsy and travellers still require something.
There is something, I'm sure.
I hadn't seen, I mean, I had read through it and thought, I can't say anything about gypsy and travellers. And I don't know, is it in there? Because I think that's something that we do have to consider, because, you know, we're having major issues with them. And it just seems to be, for me, it just seems to be something that's put to one side all the time.
Page 49, Mark.
Sorry, page
49.
Thank you. So I've marked, 1 second, I marked off page 51, page 49. Thank you. So I've missed that one. Okay, I'll have another look at that one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Well, have a look at that and see if you agree with it. While you do, I'm just going to ask a couple of quick questions myself, if I may. I know it's reflected in the document, but I am concerned with the relationship that Northamptonshire has with the Oxcam Arc. Now, you know, we are members of the Oxcam Arc, but we are on the sort of northern periphery. Just before I go on, Councillor Anslow, I fear, has to leave, but can I just, before she disappears, thank her very much. Thank you, Valerie. It's been, you know, thank you for your contributions. Sorry you've got to go.
Yeah, I'm sorry I've got to go. I've got grandchildren downstairs needing me. Okay.
Okay, well,
so thank you anyway.
All the best, and thanks.
Okay.
Thanks. We'll catch up very soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, bye. So, you know, we have this sort of rather peripheral, I mean, that's not really fair to say peripheral, but we do have this relationship with the Arc where we're not really at the heart of it. And it is we need to be very careful how we structure that relationship with the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, because we actually do have some advantages. At the moment, the best way to drive or from Oxford to Cambridge very much is using the A45 and the A14. So that is through our area very much. So we ought to sort of highlight the advantages that Northamptonshire can bring to the communications of the Arc. And I would be interested to have some feedback on that. And then I have another little matter I want to raise, but do one thing at a time. Simon.
Thank you, Chair. When we've been, obviously the council's position and the opportunities and advantages that we can bring to the Arc we discussed at this panel last year and was reflected in the consultation response. And so when we've been drafting the document, we've been very mindful. We took, there's current uncertainty, but we've tried to link into the opportunities and advantages of the ARC, but at the same time try and ensure that the document isn't dominated by the ARC and picks up that sufficiently, but also other issues. So we tried to pitch that within that context, but yeah, I take your point, because we flagged those kind of connections and other opportunities in our consultation response, and we've also, particularly on the economic development side, tried to highlight the opportunities. So it's whether members feel within this consultation document and the sort of current uncertainty, whether we need to give a bit more detail on certain issues, or at this stage. Yeah, that's all I think I can say on that at the moment. That we've tried to reflect it sufficiently, but ensure that the document isn't dominated by it, really.
No, I think that sounds good. I mean, it's important to do that, and it's also important not to only be a southward-looking authority. We also have neighbours to the west and to the north who are not in the ARC, who could be strategically valuable for everything that we're doing. Obviously looking into Leicestershire, looking across the border even into Warwickshire, and some of the we're not that far from Coventry. So there are other alliances and other strategic connections that should be considered, as well as just the ARC. Anyway, I've opened a can of worms on this one. I'm fully aware. I have another little bombshell to do in a minute, but before I do, I shall bring Councillor David Jenny in.
Yes, the ARC. Where is the ARC going? We don't know, do we?
Mount Ararat.
Yeah. Well, it ran aground on that, didn't it?
It did. Shocking navigation.
And I have I wasn't going to say fear, but no, it's not a fear. It's a risk, isn't it? I mean, we don't know where the government is going with the ARC. 1 minute it's all for it, the next minute it's pulling back. 1 minute the LEP's going to be done away with, the next minute the LEP's getting lots of money, etc., etc., etc. So we've got to be in a position to be able to provide the growth that we want, however we want it. And I welcome these questions, Simon, because I think you've understood the risks of the ARC. I mean, I take David's point. I've been making that same point at ARC meetings for the last 3 or 4 years. The A45 and the A43 is the way between Oxford and Cambridge. There's no two ways about it. Other than that, they're trying to put in a southern route through Milton Keynes, and around Bedford and then to St Neots and across a lake that's been built and things like that. So it's a long, long way off. But the reason I put my hand up initially was to sort of discuss how we actually take a town centre forward. There's been an awful lot of discussion about shopping this morning, but is that the way that the town centre of the future is going to go? Is it going to become a cafe culture? Is it going to become an entertainment centre? Is it going to become something that we never ever thought of as yet? And I think we need to think very carefully about a definition of what we actually want to see in our town centres. And I'm not sure that we, well, I'm not clear in my own mind. I mean, if I sort of think about Bruston town centre as it stands at the moment, it's too big, it's too narrow, it's too windy, it's too hilly. What can we do about those sort of things? So it's there has to be some thinking out of the box, I think.
Well, yes, town centres are certainly not going to be looking like they did 15 or 20 years ago going forward. But I do think you make a good point about entertainment and social activity. There will always be a need for some shops, certainly, because you want to service the people who are going there to be entertained and to be social, but probably not to the extent that has happened previously. But it is a heck of a question, and it isn't just for us. As I say, it's a nationwide question. It's a nationwide debate we need to have. Anyway, let's continue the nationwide debate with Councillor North, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If David's finished, I certainly would.
Oh, sorry, if David's finished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, firstly, I'll just completely agree with all he said on both points. So coming back to your Oxford Cambridge Arc, Chair, I mean, my last understanding was, new Secretary of State, new department's gone a bit lukewarm. Certainly, it's kind of the levelling up fund seemed to have changed all of that. And I think obviously you would know more than most, Chair, where we are with all the Oxford Cambridge Arc. But I personally wouldn't try and use this as a selling document and actually expand on it. I think not to criticise what you're saying, Chair, but I think Simon's got it kind of about right. If we're not trying to sell it, what I would do is may have boosted up or just concentrate on the economic questions in relation to the Oxford Cambridge Arc, and I think that comes back to the point of I think what you said about what do we want, or what do we want to be in North Northants. I mean, as you know, I have personal issues about logistics, and I know that's not necessarily shared across all colleagues within our new council, but I certainly in the Old East Northants area, Chair, I have a real issue about logistics and how few jobs that delivers.
That's my next torpedo, by the way.
Okay. Well, I pick up Simon Toit about the Golden Triangle, but I mean, I think we've got a major debate to have in relation to that and what kind of employment we want in the area. And I think that comes back full circle, Chair, to your point about the Oxcam Arc and about our relationships with neighbouring councils, because there's plenty of opportunity to pick up some slack if Cambridge land is getting full in relation to different kinds of opportunities outside logistics, and the conversations that you and I have been involved in for the last 2 or 3 years in relation to all of that. So as Simon said in his opening point, and you said in your opening part, it's a small little thing we've got to do, but it's excellent timing to do it. So it's just kind of agreeing, Chair, with what's being said. I'm still not feeling that the Oxcam Arc is charging head under the new Secretary of State. I'm just not picking anything up on that at all.
No, well, thank you, and I do agree with that. And so we have to have a warm but cautious relationship, I think. So, Councillor Barbara Jenny, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm just following on from Councillor Jenny's comment regarding regeneration of town centres. Then, to state the obvious, to get businesses into the town is the level of rent and rates that they have to pay. And we have no control over that. That's down to landlords, often out of town landlords. If we could encourage lower rents, then that would bring more businesses. We could encourage more businesses to open up in the town, but that's obviously not within our control, but it's a major factor in not bringing businesses back into the towns. But internet shopping might, of course, have some bounce back there may be a move away from it and back to conventional shopping.
Well, we'll all find out, because the restrictions are being lifted at the end. Is it, when are the restrictions being lifted? At the end of the month, isn't it? All final restrictions are being lifted, and we shall see. Okay, thank you, thank you. Councillor David Jenny, please. Or was that a legacy hand?
No, it's not a legacy hand. It's getting the torpedo nets down before you fire.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on comments about close proximity to other areas, and thinking particularly about Cambridge and or possibly Peterborough. Cambridge of the last 5 to 10 years has become exceedingly expensive. Businesses are moving out of Cambridge, although obviously the university is still there, and the pharmaceuticals industry is centered there, but is also starting to move away and out, particularly the feeder industries that go into sort of the tech development ones. If you look at Huntingdon, for instance, Huntingdon over the last 5 years or so has really come on. St Neots is beginning to pick it up, and the next step along the line is Northamptonshire. That A14 corridor is vital, and we need to be in there attracting these second tier or third tier research and development companies, which will feed our growth for years to come. I mean, sitting here at the moment, we are halfway between Oxford and Cambridge, but we will, I'm sure, be influenced more by Cambridge than we will by Oxford. I mean, both Oxford and Cambridge have already got their growth deals, and it's a matter of making sure that we come in on the coattails of Cambridge, I think.
Well, yeah, and certainly the improvements to the A14 between Huntingdon and Cambridge has made it very, very much easier to access Cambridge than it ever used to be. I mean, that A14 between Huntingdon and Cambridge used to be a nightmare. But now it's, you know, you can be in Cambridge from here, from where I'm sitting in Thrapston, you can be in Cambridge in little more than half an hour. And from, you know, from anywhere in Northamptonshire, you can be in Cambridge well within the hour. So,
well, Cambridge, I refused to go to until after 10 o'clock in the morning because of the traffic trying to get into.
Oh yeah,
but and now it's not half as bad.
No, indeed.
And we need to share in that.
But exactly, and that you can see how some strategic infrastructure that was put in place in this case, the improvement of the A14 has completely transformed a sub-region of the country. And anyway, there's a lot to be welcomed in that, and certainly cordial relations with the Oxford and the Cambridge, and as you say, probably more of the Cambridge, will assist in what we all want to do, which is to provide high quality employment and high quality, you know, having people here who are able, you know, who want to live in nice houses and want to spend money and want to actually use the area. And that's another strategic part of what we're trying to do.
But there is a problem with that as well, a sort of a political problem, in that there is a mayor of Cambridge and Peterborough, or Peterborough and Cambridge, I can't remember which way around it is, and the government in its levelling up agenda in making it abundantly clear that they're going to push money into mayoralities.
Yeah.
So we've got to be pretty sharp on our toes to be able to share in this.
Yes, and obviously that is a potential political hot potato coming down the tracks. But anyway, along with several other potential political hot potatoes, so the whole place will be full of hot potatoes. But no, well said. Before I launch my famous torpedo, I just wonder if Simon would like to come in, or any of the officers.
Thank you, Chair. There's been some really useful feedback on the town centre regeneration and the reimagining of the town centres and the changing retail. Absolutely agree with the comments made. I think we've tried to pick this up in the consultation document, but what I can also say is when we're finalising the brief for the retail evidence update, we will seek to ensure that all of the issues that members have raised have been picked up in this brief, because that's going to be a really important part of providing us with the evidence for the future strategy for the town centres. Higher value employment, members will be familiar. This is the sort of third strategic plan, and it's been a policy aspiration through the core spatial strategy, the joint core strategy, and now is a key, what we want to be a key driver for the strategic plan. And we've sought to ensure that it's really prominent within the consultation document to get feedback as to how we can deliver it, either through planning policy, but other measures. And we've talked at previous panel meetings about the housing and economic needs assessment, and we've commissioned that work now, and we're seeking that to provide advice onto the kind of mechanisms that we can use within policy and beyond that to secure higher value employment. So all of the the connectivity and the infrastructure opportunities, it's going to be critical for the strategic plan, and we want to work with other areas within the council, economic development, etc., to ensure that what we can do through the strategic plan is seeking to maximise those opportunities. But yeah, really helpful feedback on both of those sort of critical issues, which will be fundamental to the strategic plan. So, Chair, I await your torpedo or a succession of torpedoes. Thank you.
Okay, fire one. Well, yes. I mean, obviously, economic growth is absolutely fundamental to everything we do. And we do need to consider what our approach, and you're absolutely right on page 53, question 22. How should the demand for logistics be addressed in the area? Now, we are all well aware of where Northamptonshire sits in the country. We are 2.5 hours roughly from the Channel ports or the Channel Tunnel, and that is a very useful sort of point at which your truck driver's tachograph usually tells them to stop. And we are also strategically extremely well positioned for the whole of the country. We are about 2.5 hours drive from most of the population of England. So I can completely get and fully understand that there is a demand for logistics and that there is a demand for warehousing in this area. That demand is itself fueled partly by the increase in demand for internet shopping and so on and so forth, and regardless of the arguments pro or con, it is also been fueled by the Brexit business, because of course that's had some influence on the global supply chain. However, we are looking around Northamptonshire, and this is not just a Northamptonshire problem, but looking around Northamptonshire or Northamptonshire in general, there is a cumulative amount of logistics developments, either that have come forward or that have not come forward but are planned. And you know, naturally in planning management, you have to take these things on their own merits, but there is now much more a cumulative impact beginning to affect certainly the less strategic A road network, but also with the you know, strategic road networks, you know, the A45, the A43, the A14, and so on and so forth, and the wider regions as well. Now we have to consider what we do about this and whether there is any mileage in or prospect of discussing how to mitigate the cumulative impact of so much logistics development. Also, we have to consider the benefits of, you know, of employment. Now, as I understand it, a lot of logistics development that is coming forward is very high tech and uses much better automation. That is indeed, as I understand it, the purpose behind some of the new planning, the new warehouse developments that are coming forward, is to facilitate automation. But of course, that has a flip side. First of all, that you often have a tenant or owner of a warehouse development wanting to redevelop a warehouse into a much, you know, a high-tech automated structure and move out of the one that they might be already occupying, thus leaving a vacant building. And of course, you have the effects, which again can become cumulative, on things like flooding and certainly things like traffic and transport and the highways infrastructure. So I've made a sort of rather lengthy discussion about sort of sounding rather anti-logistics development. I'm not anti-logistics development. It absolutely has a place in the employment mix, but it is a place not I think perhaps to the emphasis that we've seen in the last probably 5 or 10 years, but probably as little as 5 years. And I do appreciate some of the national and some of the global issues which have led to the demand for logistics development. So anyway, Simon, that, sir, is my torpedo. It's got you well below the waterline. Let's see how you damage control people get on. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for your feedback on those measures. So in terms of logistics, I don't think I need to expand on all of the issues that you've just raised, Chair. Just a couple of things that it's worth just picking up. Since SEMLEP are now commissioning a strategic study looking at logistics demand across the Southeast Midlands. So that will obviously look at the quantum and strategic demand. I've talked about the housing and economic needs assessment, and we have flagged to the consultants that our piece of work needs to respond appropriately to the work that SEMLEP are doing. So come back to the evidence base, but there'll be a clear evidence base to inform the development of the strategic plan. The cumulative impacts, absolutely agree. However, in whichever way the strategic plan takes forward the quantum and specific sites, one of the key issues is going to be the cumulative impact on the highways network through transport modelling and flooding and all of the issues that you've raised. So I think at this stage in the sort of plan making, we know that there's strong demand. We've had a, you know, I'm sure that we know that there's applications coming in imminently for further logistics, but all of the issues you've raised, Chair, we'll need to address as best we can through the plan making process. And obviously the plan making process allows the consideration of cumulative impacts, suitable appraisals, which are perhaps more challenging when a speculative scheme comes through the development management process. So all of the issues that you've raised, Chair, we will need to take forward as we develop the plan. And but I think with the SEMLET work, the work that we've commissioned locally, we'll have a very robust evidence base to identify the issues, and then it will be decisions to be made as the plan is developed as to the quantum and mitigation measures and other issues informed by all of the evidence and assessments that we have to do. So yeah, nothing more on that, Chair.
No, well, thank you, Simon, and that, you know, that is very helpful. And you're quite right. I mean, you know, to highlight the SEMLET review, which I very much welcome, and you know, Northamptonshire is contributing to that review financially and also obviously in terms of engagement with the review process. And wearing my SEMLET hat, I will of course be very, very interested from a SEMLET point of view as to how that goes forward. So I'm glad that the cumulative impact is appreciated and, you know, is feeding the discussion that we have. I mean, as I say, I'm not going to go into this application or that application regarding any individual schemes that are coming forward, but it is just the strategic sort of situation that we find ourselves in. Anyway, there's a couple of speakers, and it's the good Councillor David Jenny, please.
I'm glad we've got round to cumulative impacts, because history tells us that areas that depend on one single industry sooner or later fall into economic decline. So this is a mistake which we must avoid. Sooner or later, I'm sure logistics will start to tail off, and we need to be in a position where we are not totally dependent upon them. So it is crucial, and that's one of the reasons why I was suggesting that we need these high-tech companies, this spin-off, etc., from Cambridge and so on. But we cannot allow North Northamptonshire just to become the logistics centre of the country without other things. I don't mind us being the logistics centre of the country if we've got other things as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you're right. You're absolutely right about not wanting to be reliant on one thing only. And, you know, an employment mix is exactly that. It is an employment mix. So yeah, you make a very good point.
Yeah, but we've had these discussions many a time before.
Yes,
so
we have.
I'm sure I'm not saying anything new, am I, Simon?
No, Councillor. No.
Didn't think so.
Yeah, I think we've been saying this for as long as I've been on planning policy, which is actually rather a long time. So the situation hasn't changed, but in some ways it's accelerated. Councillor North, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's only about a decade, I think, that doing planning policy, so, or just a bit over. So just started, really, I would think. I just, this won't be news to you either, Chair, but you remember that word aspiration that we were picking up on a couple of years ago? I think it's still relevant, basically. And I think, you know, one of the issues I have concerns with consultants, if they have to be really good enough on picking up what we actually want, and that's why I use that word aspiration again, because you know that what can happen, of course, is that they take out a needs assessment, and hey ho, the economic needs is exactly the same as what we've got at the moment. And then the evidence base is, well, you need more logistics, because that's the evidence, because we've done the assessment and that's what's needed in the area. And I think we've had problems, certainly in the East Northants area, we have had problems with that for years, you will recall. And you know, I think it's still ongoing. I mean, there is there's a particular site not far from here, you know, in Rushton, where we tried to get something else on that site. The developer, absolutely, the evidence base is logistics. That's what we want to put on there. So as much as you try to broaden the scope for different businesses, we always come up against that. So I suppose what I'm looking for, some reassurance from Simon and the team, from the consultants we engaged in. It's actually not just, we're not just going to get the same old churn. The evidence base is as it is, because that's what people want, is the logistics, and then we end up having to use that. And I do get concerned with Semlet, Chair, when I was involved with it more, the industrial strategy and Semlet were really pushing logistics up as how wonderful it is. We are in the heart of the country, we can offer logistics, and you know, we're really good at it, and this is a growth area. So you know, I take some comfort, Chair, that you're on Semlet, but I do concern that part of the Semlet ethos is logistics, and if we are as a corporate body trying to move away and have a bit more diverse you know, businesses, then you know, I am concerned, and obviously would like, you know, some reassurance, as I said, that the consultants do know exactly what's kind of some of the aspiration we want, rather than just what's gone before.
No, I know. Thank you, Councillor North, because I think that when you have a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy on the evidence base, because there's a lot of logistics, it must be right, that can squash alternative visions, and we do need alternative visions. Sure, I can completely understand that, you know, we are a good place for logistics, and logistics should be part of the mix. I don't think anybody would say we shouldn't have it, but we should have other things as well. I mean, I also note that we have no higher education facility. I mean, now, of course, you know, building a university is a very ambitious project, but you know, what's wrong with aspiration? What's wrong with it? You know, it is certainly something to consider, how we impart skills in our young people, so that they can use those skills to work in this area and to put them to good effect. Anyway, Simon, do you want to come back on any of this?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor North. In respect of the sort of aspiration and the technical work, the as we've picked up in the draft consultation paper, and we will certainly, and we've fed in, and it's in the brief that we will be looking for the study to recognise the aspiration to diversify the economy into higher value industries, and how it can capitalise, how North Northamptonshire can capitalise on the improved connections to Cambridge and the conditions within those markets. So it's certainly something that we will want the study to pick up, and we'll certainly make sure that is fed into the study as it is developed, and that we can certainly provide the consultants with a strong steer from members of this panel in relation to that issue. Absolutely.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Simon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lengthy document which has got a number of consultation questions, which I think we've all had a chance to, you know, we've kicked around a few subjects, but of course, you know, it's almost outside the scope of a 2-hour meeting or an hour and a half meeting to actually drill down on every one of the questions. But there are a total of, how many was it? 38 questions. And I think what would be useful is that at our leisure, if anybody has any feedback on any of the subjects also or of the consultation questions that they don't have time to bring up in this meeting, that they feed it back to Simon and the team. Would that be helpful?
I think so, Chair. Obviously, if it with the process of finalising the document and going and aiming to go out for consultation next month, if members could provide that feedback sooner rather than later. Sue, Terry, Simon, any idea on timescales for that? But no, I appreciate, Chair, that it's a lengthy document, and we would welcome feedback to ensure that we've picked up the issues before we come back to yourselves to agree the document to go out for consultation.
No, well, I mean, I think that's right, and we don't want to hold up the good work that's been done already, and it is a good document, and I recognize a lot of it from previous iterations, but it's really been worked through and rejuvenated. So I'm, as I say, congratulations to you and the team for put it together. Simon Richardson wants to pop in.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to, can we say by the end of the week? That gives us the end of the month. Then it'll keep us on track and flowing. So if there are any additional comments, points, we've jotted them down, in particular around the town centres and the new settlement elements and employment and logistics, and we'll look and talk to you, Chair, in further detail, just to make sure that we've adequately covered those issues in light of the debate that's gone on this morning. But if there are any other points, then by the end of the week, and we'll make every effort to include those within the final document for consultation.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. And as I say, we'll try not to put too many spokes in your wheels. But if there is any feedback that anybody has got, that would be terrific, and I know it will be much appreciated. Okay, does anybody else have anything that they would like to say on this document now?
Just to say, Chair, that Simon's. I was thinking before I passed it over to him. I was thinking to the end of the week as well. So that's that'd be really helpful. So
all right. Well, that's great. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and that was a very interesting discussion. And I appreciate the contributions that everybody's made, and I appreciate Simon your courteous responses to anything, whether or not they're in torpedo shape. No, thank you very much. So I'm at 3.1. We are members of the planning EAP are recommended to consider and provide feedback on the draft scope and issues consultation document. And can we have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Jenny. A seconder. Thank you, Councillor North. All those in favour? Are there any against? Can't hear anything. Are there any abstentions? Can't hear anything. Then that's carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And by the end of the week, that would be great. And we now just have one other item, because item 6, which is the executive forward plan, which is at the end of your agenda. I'm just trying to find it myself, actually. Here we are, page 91 and on. And this takes us up to May. And you will note there's one or two things which would affect, comes out of our area. And what were they? There will be a tree strategy and policy and a pollinator strategy. I think that could be some of that. That could be the green area. There's a development of governance arrangements on Stanton Cross. Some discussion on a sixth form college towns fund, and no, that's not us. And we'll be considering the Cottingham neighbourhood plan, which has passed its referendum on Thursday, by a very substantial majority on a pretty high turnout, actually, for a referendum on a local plan. So that's good news. Then there will also, by now we're into May, there'll be some discussion on Corby and the Towns Fund. So does anybody have any comments on that? Okay.
Yeah, David, just one question.
Yep.
How do we get reports as to how the SUEs are progressing?
In terms of actual, well, I mean, basically we discuss it with myself, Rob Harbour, and we can give you. Are you referring particularly to the Russian one?
No, not particularly. I'm just curious as to how they get reported in to the executive, because I've not seen anything yet. Perhaps you could give some thought to that.
I will.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor North.
Well, thank you, Chair. I mean, I share that one because a lot of these reserve matters will have to come back to strategic planning, as you're aware. A lot of the sites, especially Kettering and the Wellingborough developments.
Yeah, sure.
So I think some useful updates to where they're at and what's coming back where, you know, would be helpful generally. And that's David, not just the Russian one, just in general terms, stages and what's coming up where. Okay, well, I mean, I hear that, and I know Rob Harbour's on the call, so I'm sure he's heard it too. So yeah, I mean, a quick update on the progress on the various SUEs could be valuable. So yeah, agree with you. Okay, well, unless anybody else has got anything they'd like to say. They don't. In that case, can I just thank all the members and all the officers for their helpful contributions, of their wisdom, their support. Thank you all for your making such an interesting discussion this afternoon or this morning. And we managed to do a planning policy meeting in less than 2 hours. Councillor North and Councillor Jenny will be most impressed with that. That's almost a world record. But I'd like to thank you all very much and declare the meeting closed.